In this video, we will discuss how hormones work. You can find this information in Chapter 16 of your textbook. The learning objectives of the screencast are as follows. Explain the mechanism of action of steroid and non-steroid hormones. List the 6 steroid hormones that you will study and learn. Identify the hormone that is not a steroid hormone, but has a mechanism of action that is similar to one. List some effects caused by hormones. Describe the 3 types of stimuli that cause the release of hormones, and describe how most hormone secretion is regulated by negative feedback and the nervous system. Let's talk about the chemistry of hormones. The chemical makeup of hormones are as follows. Hormones are either steroids or steroidal, or they're non-steroidal. That is, they're made of amino acids or chains of amino acids, polypeptides, or proteins. Why do you care? Well, the chemistry of a hormone determines its mechanism of action, that is, how it works, how quickly it works, and how long that hormone persists in the body before it is broken down. Let's talk first about steroids. If you recall, a steroid is made from cholesterol. It is a lipid. Because it's lipid soluble, it can diffuse across the plasma membrane into the target cell. Again, substances that are fat soluble and nonpolar can diffuse right across the plasma membrane. And that's going to impact how steroid hormones affect their target cells, or I should say how they are able to impact their target cells. Let's look first at the mechanism of action of steroid hormones. And again, mechanism of action simply means how something works. In this case, a steroid hormone. So steroids are lipid soluble. That means that they can diffuse right through the plasma membrane. So what you're looking at here is a cell. Here's the plasma membrane. Here's the cytoplasm. Here's the nucleus. In the nucleus, of course, we have the DNA. DNA is used to transcribe messenger RNA, which is then used to translate the production of a protein in the cytoplasm. So a steroid hormone is fat soluble. So it can diffuse right across the plasma membrane and bind receptors inside the cell. So these are intracellular receptors that the steroid binds to. So now let's walk through the mechanism of action of a steroid hormone. So we have a steroid hormone here. Because it's fat soluble, it can diffuse right through the plasma membrane and bind a receptor in the cytoplasm. Now we have what is called a receptor hormone complex that will move through the nuclear pore of the nuclear membrane or nuclear envelope and enter the nucleus. And there, that receptor hormone complex will bind directly to the DNA. And it can turn genes off, it can turn genes on. And this illustration is turning a gene on, meaning that that gene is being used to transcribe a messenger RNA. And then that messenger RNA is going to leave the nucleus through a nuclear pore and enter the cytoplasm, where it's going to be used to translate a new protein. And that protein can be an enzyme. That protein can deactivate other enzymes. That protein could act as an ion channel. So this is how a steroid hormone exerts its effects on a target cell. All steroidal hormones work this way, by direct action on the DNA. For every hormone that we cover, you must know its mechanism of action. This only requires that you know the chemistry of the hormone. So I always stress to students that they should memorize the 6 steroid hormones that we are going to cover. They are the sex hormones. These are the hormones that are produced by the gonads, the testes and the ovaries. Progesterone, testosterone, and estrogen. The other 3 are released by the adrenal cortex. They're called adrenal corticosteroids, steroids produced by the adrenal cortex. They are aldosterone, cortisone, and cortisol. Commit to memory that these are the 6 steroid hormones that we're going to cover, because if you know these 6 steroid hormones, you know that these are the 6 where the mechanism of action is direct action on the DNA. All the other hormones we're going to cover are non-steroidal hormones, and therefore they're going to work through a different mechanism that we're going to talk about in just a moment. So memorize these 3. They're either produced by the gonads and our sex hormones, or they're produced by the adrenal glands. Another way you can commit them to memory is by noting that 1, 2, 3, 4 of the 6 end in rone: progesterone, testosterone, aldosterone, cortisone. The only ones that don't are estrogen and cortisol. So that might help you remember these 6 as well. If a hormone is not a steroid hormone, then it is a non-steroid hormone. And typically they are composed of amino acids. They're either amines, where they're basically an altered amino acids, or they can be a relatively short polymer of amino acids, which are peptides, or they can be a protein, which is 50 or more amino acids. Often these non-steroid hormones are large and they're charged, so they cannot cross the plasma membrane. So how are they going to work? If they can't cross the plasma membrane, how are they going to exert their effects inside the cell? Good question. Well, they're going to work through second messengers, just like some neurotransmitters like noradrenaline do. They bind receptors on the outer surface of the plasma membrane, and it causes changes inside the cell, including the production of a second messenger, which then causes changes inside the cell. So in this illustration, here we have our target cell. So here's the cytoplasm, here's the plasma membrane, here's our non-steroid hormone. So our non-steroid hormone is large and charged, so it cannot simply cross the plasma membrane, right? Because it's charged and it's large. So what it's going to do is it's going to bind to a receptor on the outer surface of the plasma membrane. This is going to cause a cascade of events to occur, including the activation of an enzyme. But ultimately what happens inside the cell is a second messenger is produced. In this illustration example, it's cyclic AMP, which is often the second messenger. Now remember, a second messenger I described as being like a gopher, right? So the hormone can't get into the cell, so it's going to delegate to this second messenger. It's going to say, hey, do this, right? And that this could be numerous things. It could be activating an enzyme, deactivating an enzyme, stimulating secretion by that cell, opening ion channels, closing ion channels, or turning on or turning off genes. The bottom line is non-steroid hormones cannot get into the cell, so they turn on second messenger systems that then cause changes inside the cell. So this figure just again illustrates the mechanism of action, that is how it works, for a non-steroid hormone. We have the non-steroid hormone binding the receptor on the outer surface of the plasma membrane, causing a cascade of events that leads to the production of a cyclic AMP. That's the second messenger, which then causes changes inside the cell. I want to convey to you that a second messenger system such as this can have a huge amplification effect. Even though a one hormone molecule only binds to a receptor for, say, milliseconds, it can result in literally a million products being produced from just that binding of one molecule for a brief period of time. So you can have one hormone molecule that produces hundreds of cyclic AMPs, or I should say many cyclic AMPs, which then catalyze hundreds of reactions, which then lead to a million products. So it is not a 1-to-1 ratio in terms of binding of non-steroid hormone molecules to production of products. It's greatly amplified. So bottom line is a small secretion of hormone binding for a very short period of time can exert very large effects on a target cell. So I mentioned that if you know the chemistry of a hormone, you know its mechanism of action. That is, if you know that a hormone is a steroid hormone, you know that it passes through the plasma membrane and binds intracellular receptors, which then bind to the DNA and turn genes on and off. And if you know a hormone is a non-steroidal hormone, it works through second messengers. However, there is one exception to the rule about chemistry and mechanism of action, and that is thyroid hormone. Thyroid hormone is a non-steroidal hormone. It's an amine, a modified amino acid. However, it does have the ability to cross the plasma membrane, enter the cytoplasm, bind to receptors, and then have direct impacts on the DNA. How does it do it? Well, there are special channels for thyroid hormone. That is, thyroid hormone is able to cross the plasma membrane and enter its target cell because there are special channels there. So even though thyroid hormone is a non-steroid hormone, it works like a steroid hormone in terms of its mechanism of action and binds directly to the DNA, turning genes on or off. Now let's discuss what causes a hormone to be secreted and then what turns off hormone secretion. If you recall, in the nervous system, there had to be a stimulus in order for a neuron to generate an action potential, causing the release of neurotransmitter. And similarly, there has to be a stimulus, a change, in order for an endocrine cell to release hormones. And those stimuli fall into one of three categories. Either nervous stimuli, meaning the nervous system is causing the release of hormone, humoral stimuli, meaning there is some change in the blood that causes the release of the hormone, or you can have a hormonal stimulus where one hormone causes the release of another hormone. Let's look at this a little closer. As we journey through the endocrine system, you're going to see several instances where the nervous system and the endocrine system are interconnected. And one of the areas where they're interconnected is where the sympathetic nervous system stimulates secretion by the adrenal medulla. If you recall, the sympathetic nervous system sends impulses to the cells of the adrenal medulla, and then the adrenal medulla releases epinephrine, norepinephrine, and trace amounts of dopamine. So the stimulus of secretion of these hormones is nervous stimuli, that is, an action potential and resulting neurotransmitter from the sympathetic nervous system. So this is an example of nervous stimuli, where the nervous system is causing the release of hormones. Another type of stimulus for hormone release is called a humoral stimulus. And a humoral stimulus is any change in substances in the blood other than hormones. Any change in substances in the blood that cause the release of a hormone. So in this example, we have the parathyroid glands. The parathyroid glands release parathyroid hormone, which increases blood calcium levels. The stimulus for the release of parathyroid hormone is a drop in blood calcium levels. So if blood calcium levels drop, the parathyroid glands release parathyroid hormone. In this example, the stimulus is a drop in blood levels of calcium. Therefore, it is a humoral stimulus. Another example would be an increase in blood sugar levels. An increase in blood sugar levels causes the release of insulin. So that would be another example of a humoral stimulus. Lastly is a hormonal stimulus. So believe it or not, one hormone can target an endocrine gland and cause the secretion of another hormone. An example of this would be the release of thyroid stimulus hormone, adrenal corticotropic hormone, and these hormones which are called the gonadotropins, right? So all of these hormones are released by the anterior pituitary gland. And what do? They target the thyroid gland, causing the release of thyroid hormone, the adrenal cortex, causing the release of hormones called cortisone, cortisol, and aldosterone, which you'll learn about later. And we have these other hormones that target the testes and the ovaries, causing release of sex hormones. Okay, the specific hormones does not matter. What I'm trying to get you to see here is that hormones released by the anterior pituitary gland are targeting other endocrine organs, causing them to release hormones. So the stimulus for this hormone secretion is another hormone. And so this is an example of hormonal stimulus. I also want to introduce a term, and that term is tropin. Hormones that target other endocrine tissue are called tropins. So these hormones here that are being released and targeting the thyroid gland and the adrenal cortex and the gonads, these are tropins or tropic hormones. So in summary, those are the three types of stimuli that can cause the release of hormones. If the nervous system is causing the release of hormones, it's a nervous stimulus. If some substance in the blood changing is causing the release of hormone, it's a humoral stimulus. And if it's one hormone causing the release of another hormone, it's a hormonal stimulus. And the hormone that is targeting the endocrine organ is called a tropin or tropic hormone. So we've talked about what causes hormone secretion to be turned on. Now let's mention what causes hormone secretion to be turned off. Overwhelmingly, it's negative feedback mechanisms. So as a hormone is being released, typically it reduces the stimulus that caused it to be released in the first place. So for example, a rise in blood sugar levels causes the release of the hormone insulin. Insulin decreases blood sugar levels. With the drop in blood sugar levels, now the stimulus that caused the release of insulin in the first place is now removed, and so insulin secretion stops. If you have forgotten how a negative feedback mechanism works, let me take you on a trip down memory lane. A negative feedback mechanism works like a household thermostat. So this is January in Wisconsin, and for whatever reason you open the window, what's going to happen to the temperature? Temperature in the house is going to drop. If the set point let's say the set point on the thermostat is 70 degrees, you open the window and it drops to 68 degrees Fahrenheit. That's detected by a thermometer. That's the receptor. Communicates that drop to the control center. That's the thermostat that's set to 70 degrees. Thermostat realizes that the actual temperature is now below the set point, and so it's going to close the switch. It's going to send electricity to the effector, which are the heaters, and the heaters are going to attempt to decrease or remove that drop in temperature, that stimulus. And if it's successful and gets the temperature back to 70 degrees, now the effector has decreased or removed the stimulus that caused the effector to come on in the first place, and the effector, the heaters, will turn off. This is a classic negative feedback mechanism, and that in general is how most hormones are regulated in terms of secretion. So again, that is how most hormone secretion is regulated. You will run into a chosen few hormones that are actually regulated by positive feedback, or there's no real feedback mechanism at all, but most are regulated by negative feedback. I want to end this discussion of control of hormone release by mentioning a couple of additional points. The nervous system can make adjustments to hormone levels when needed. They can modify the stimulation or inhibition of endocrine glands, and the nervous system can also override normal endocrine controls. For example, under severe stress, the hypothalamus and the sympathetic nervous system can override insulin to allow blood glucose levels to increase, right? This prepares the body for fight or flight in this example. Now that we have completed an introduction and overview of the endocrine system and hormones, we're going to start focusing on individual hormones. And for every hormone that we cover, you're going to need to know the following things. You're going to need to know the organ or tissue that releases that hormone. You're going to need to know in general where that organ or tissue that releases it is found. You're going to need to know what the target organ or tissue is for that hormone. You're also going to need to know what stimulates the secretion of that hormone, the effects of that hormone, its chemistry and mechanism of action, and how that hormone is regulated. Is it regulated by positive feedback, negative feedback, or no regulation really at all? Now let's review the learning objectives of the screencast. Explain the mechanism of action of steroid and non-steroid hormones. List the 6 steroid hormones that you will study and learn. Identify the hormone that is not a steroid hormone but has a mechanism of action that is similar to one. List some effects caused by hormones. Describe the 3 types of stimuli that cause the release of hormones, and describe how most hormone secretion is regulated by negative feedback and the nervous system.